Welcome, everyone, to the Cecilia Health webinar. We're so glad you could join us this evening. We're going to be speaking on advanced diabetes nutrition, taking it to the next level. Should you have any technical difficulties during the broadcast, there's a phone number down at the bottom of the screen to call. The phone number is 1-800-263-6317. Our format includes a short presentation followed by an interactive discussion. Using your webinar toolbar, which you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a question section. So at the end, you'll have a chance to ask questions, and we look forward to an interactive webinar this evening. Just a disclaimer, we know that the information you're about to hear may motivate you to make lifestyle changes, so please consult your physician before making any changes to your current routine. This online Q&A session is intended to give general advice. This information is not a substitute for personal medical advice and involves the professional opinion of the Cecilia Health Certified Diabetes Care and Education Specialist. Our speaker this evening is Michelle Dart. Michelle began her nursing career 26 years ago. She went on to get her master's degree and became a pediatric nurse practitioner. She has 20 years experience working with children and adults with diabetes. Michelle became a certified diabetes education and care specialist 17 years ago and has maintained her certification. Michelle has authored a nursing textbook, self-published diabetes-related books, and has been a contributing author for multiple publications, including Cecilia Health's blog. She fulfills her passion by coaching patients to make lifestyle changes that improve health and quality of life. Michelle has been with Cecilia Health since 2018, and today she would like to support you all in better understanding nutrition, a cornerstone to healthy living. So thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us this evening, and you may take it away.
Thank you, Katie. So today we're going to talk about a few different aspects of nutrition. Our discussion will include what is a carbohydrate and where do we find those carbohydrates? Do I need to think about other nutrients other than carbs? What is the glycemic index? Some of you may have heard that and maybe don't fully understand it. We'll talk a little bit more about that today. How do I read a food label? We'll break that down a little bit better for you. And what about fiber? I'm sure you've heard a little bit about that and how does that factor into blood glucose? Are sugar substitutes safe? How do I manage my diabetes using carbohydrate counting? And then we'll do the questions, answers, and share some information. As always, I would encourage you to talk with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your diabetes management routine. So to start off, food is really made up of three main nutrients. That would be your protein, your fat, your carbohydrates. Each of these things are broken down at different rates and converted into blood sugars. Protein is going to be found in your foods such as meat, beans, dairy, and cheese. And we always recommend lean sources of protein. That's going to be your chicken, turkey breast, fish, beans, low-fat milk, or cheese. Um, Fat is, something that we often think we need to be cautious of. And, there are good fats, there are bad fats. Fats are often found in oils, butter, or margarine, a lot of dressings, nuts, avocado. Plant-based fats are really the ones that are the healthier fats. That's going to be your avocado, nuts, nut butter, oils. Um, Carbohydrates is probably what you've heard most about in relation to blood sugar. This is going to be found in your starches, your fruits, milk, and sugar sources. There's three types of carbohydrates, and that's going to be your sugars, your starches, and fiber. So looking more particularly at the source of carbohydrate, it's the main nutrient in food that raises the blood sugar levels. And that's why your providers probably speak more about the carbohydrate part of your meal. The amount and type of carbohydrate you eat determines how quickly your blood sugar level changes after you've eaten. Carbohydrates from liquids, things like orange juice, regular soda, they're usually converted to blood sugar more quickly. And that might be why you would choose that to treat a low blood sugar, because it is going to work more quickly than something else that you might have to take time to chew and your body needs to break down. Carbohydrates from solid foods such as pasta and fruits are slower to convert to a blood sugar. Um, Now, foods that have little or very little carbohydrate, these are going to be your non-starchy vegetables. You might hear a little bit about the starchy vegetables when you're looking at your carbohydrates. Those are going to be more like your carrots, your peas, your corn. But when you're looking to limit the carbohydrates, you're going to want the non-starchy vegetables, the more green vegetables would be the most likely source, but other things like, peppers. So you just want to choose a non-starchy vegetable. Butter is a lower carbohydrate than margarine. Eggs, meat, poultry, fish, cheese, and nuts. These foods really don't significantly influence your blood sugar levels. If you were to eat large amounts, you may see a slight impact, but you really would have to eat a large amount of these foods. Now, people rarely eat just one food or nutrient at a time. So, when you're looking at what is going to happen to my blood sugar after I've eaten, that blood glucose level is going to fluctuate depending on if you're having a mixed meal, how much fat and protein you're eating, and how simple or refined those carbohydrates are that are on your plate. One example is you have a burger on a bun with a salad. That'll raise the blood sugar more slowly than if you were to eat just that bun alone. Now, looking at the glycemic index, this is going to measure how quickly and how high your blood sugar levels will rise in response to different foods. Only carbohydrate containing foods are really going to have a glycemic index. But what does that number even mean? 70 and above is considered a high glycemic index. A medium glycemic index is going to be around 55 to 69. And to go with a low glycemic index, that's going to be 54 or lower. The high glycemic foods, they can raise your blood sugar levels in as little as 15 minutes after you eat. So think about your breads, your bagels, your cereals, potatoes, pasta, pretzels, rice cakes, popcorn, saltine crackers, some of your fruits like melons and pineapple. They are going to work really quick in raising that blood sugar. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, your low glycemic foods, it's going to take longer to see the rise in the blood sugar, and the blood sugar probably will not rise as much. So, this is where you would look at things that are 100% whole wheat, maybe some pumpernickel bread, oatmeal, um, some of your most fruits, sweet potatoes, corn, yams, some different legumes and lentils. Some of your non-starchy vegetables are also going to be low glycemic foods. Now, how is the glycemic index even useful when making food choices? You want to choose more foods that are low glycemic index because they'll raise that blood sugar level less and more gradually. And you also will likely feel fuller longer from these foods. They tend to satisfy the appetite better and therefore may assist with weight loss efforts. Now, when you choose high glycemic index foods, you really should monitor your blood sugar after you eat just to see how high does it go. This helps you learn how your body's responding to different foods and then which ones make you feel your best. So it really helps in kind of future decision making. When you see how is your body responding to different foods, you'll know a better balance of how to create a plate that maybe has a little variety of high glycemic index and low glycemic index foods. Now, reading a food label sometimes can be a little overwhelming when you're first looking at it, but there's a few different things on that food label that are really important. Um, when you look at the label, right below you see that serving size and how many servings are in a container. So you want to make sure that if you sit down with a small bag of chips, not that I recommend chips with diabetes, but you know what? We all have things that maybe aren't the healthiest choices, but paying attention to those serving sizes makes a difference. It's easy to open a small bag of chips and eat the whole thing. Well, there may actually be more than one serving size in that bag. So when you're looking at how many servings per container, if you've eaten the whole container, you're going to want to multiply all of the contents by that amount. So, for example, we have here servings per container is 4, and each serving is half a cup. Well, if somebody ate a full cup, that's 2 servings. So when we look at the calories, which says, hey, there's 90 calories, but you just ate 2 servings, that would actually be 180 calories that you just ate. Um, so you do want to pay attention to what the calories are, and you can also see how many calories are from fat when you're trying to figure out how things are going to break down for you. There are some nutrients that we do want to limit, and they're kind of just there below the calories, and that's your total fat, your saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium. Those are things we tend to want to limit. Um, and then you'll see that there is a section with the total carbohydrates, and below that, it actually breaks it down between the dietary fiber and the sugars. And then below there is going to be a section where there are nutrients that you really want. They might be some of the different vitamins, calcium, iron, and it gives you a percentage of how much is in there. And then on the very bottom, there's just a little bit of additional information if you were basing your routine on a 2,000 calorie diet, this is how it breaks down. So when you're reading that food label, we encourage you to really look at those ingredients first. The ingredients are listed in descending order by weight. So those in the largest amount are going to be listed first. You want to look for whole grain to be the first ingredient in those starchy foods. That's going to be your healthier option. You want to look for words that mean sugar. Sometimes it's not so obvious that there's a lot of sugar in something. Other words that you might see in those ingredients that tell you there is sugar would be dextrose, cane sugar, corn sweetener or corn syrup, maybe corn syrup solids, evaporated cane juice, fructose, fruit juice concentrates, high fructose corn syrup, malt syrup, concentrated fruit juice, maltodextrin. So you can see there are a lot of different ingredients that really mean sugar which really translates into a risk of a higher blood sugar after that is eaten. Now, what about that fiber? Fiber is a type of carbohydrate, just like sugars and starches, but it's not broken down by the body and doesn't contribute any of those calories. Um, on a food label, fiber is listed under total carbohydrate, like we just mentioned. Because fiber doesn't raise the blood glucose levels, some people will actually take those grams of fiber and subtract them from the total grams of carbohydrate on the label and use that when they're determining maybe an insulin dose. Many foods that contain fiber, such as fruits, vegetables, whole grain breads, cereals, and pastas, they also contain sugar and or starch, and those things need to be counted. Now, a lot of people wonder about sugar substitutes. Are they safe? Some of the most common sugar substitutes are broken down on this chart here, and I'll go through a little bit about each one. Aspartame or equal is actually 200 times as sweet as sugar, and it does not have an effect on blood glucose levels. And then we also have Splenda. This is another common one that people tend to use. It is sucralose, and it's actually 600 times as sweet as sugar. That is really sweet. And it contains about 1 gram of carbohydrate per packet or per teaspoon. This actually can affect blood sugar levels if you consume a large quantity at one time. Um, One that a lot of people are familiar with is saccharin or sweet and low. This is 300 to 500 times as sweet as sugar. And we do not see it affect the blood sugar. Um, the next one, I am going to apologize. I'm not going to pronounce it correctly. As asulfame potassium. This is going to be found in Sunnet or Sweet One. And this is 300 times as sweet as sugar. And you won't see it affect the blood glucose like you would regular sugar. Another commonly used one is stevia, also known as a sweet leaf, truvia, or stevia. Now, this is not going to affect the blood glucose as much as sugar would either. And those are just a few of some that are commonly seen. But natural sugar substitutes are known as sugar alcohols. They are typically less sweet than sugar. They provide half the calories of sugar, but they do have some calories. Since half of the carbohydrate of sugar alcohols is not really absorbed by the body, you can subtract half of the sugar alcohol grams from the total carbohydrate grams on a label. Some examples of this would be erythritol, glycerol, isomalt, lactolol. You notice there are a lot of them end in all or lol, maltitol, mannitol, sorbitol, and xylitol. So if you see that OL at the end, you know it's one of those that's got the sugar alcohols. And even though they are called sugar alcohols, they do not contain alcohol. Now, with carbohydrate counting, a lot of people get a little overwhelmed when they're first starting out with carbohydrate counting. I think it's because we have to juggle multiple things, figuring out the size of the serving. It's figuring out how many grams of carbohydrates are in it. And then oftentimes we use that information to determine maybe an insulin dose. So it's very helpful for people who are dosing rapid acting mealtime insulins, such as Novolog, Humalog, Apidra, um, Admelog is another. So the rapid acting insulins often are dosed based on one unit covers so many grams of carbohydrates. So some helpful tools are going to be measuring cups and maybe a scale. They do have inexpensive scales, even at the dollar store or at Walmart. Maybe use an app or a reference book to look up carb content of various foods. So, one example is the Calorie King, Calorie, Fat, and Carbohydrate Counter, which is a great reference book. I believe there's also an app for that. And it really has pretty much anything you can imagine in there. So if you're looking for a carb content, this would be a great resource. And then, of course, your food label. Sorry about that. So your food label really is going to give you that information as well. Just make sure you look at that serving size so you know if you're having what's on that label for the carb content, or do you need to multiply it because you're having more than one serving. So before eating, measuring or weighing your portion and looking up the grams of carbs for that portion, and a lot of times writing it down so you have a little record, and then it's helpful to refer back to when you eat something similar of the same serving size. Now, if you're not taking rapid acting mealtime insulin, try to keep your grams of carbs consistent for each meal per day. Not necessarily the same foods, but just the same amount of carbs. If you do take rapid acting insulin, it's always a good idea to have a conversation with your provider or your diabetes coach, your diabetes educator about dosing your insulin based on the amount of carbohydrates you're eating. Now, by checking your blood sugar 2 hours after your meal, you can then determine how well did that dose work. That helps you to determine, is this the right dose to cover the carbs that I've eaten? And that helps to share with your provider to fine tune that dosing as you're creating the best management plan. Now, here's an example of carbohydrate counting. Somebody might want to have an apple and peanut butter as a snack, which is a great snack. Weigh the apple. Let's say it weighs 3 ounces. And then you want to measure out the peanut butter. Here you've got 2 tablespoons. The reference book tells you to use a 3-ounce apple, which is the equivalent of 15 grams of carbohydrates. And then when you look at the label on the jar of peanut butter, it tells you 2 tablespoons equals 6 grams of carbs. So here you have 15 grams of carbs plus 6 grams of carbs, and your total is 21 grams of carbs. So when you're looking at a snack, what's a good range of carbs? Shooting for 15 to 30 grams for a snack is reasonable. Now, think about a meal. Here's an example of chicken breast, rice, broccoli, and some pudding. So you would measure out the portion of rice, and the recommendation is for 2/3 cup. You measure the broccoli, you've got a cup. The pudding is a half a cup. Chicken is a protein, so it really has no carbs, so there's nothing to count for that one. The app tells you that a third cup of rice is equivalent to 15 grams of carbs. So you would double that to 30 grams of carbs since you're having 2 serving sizes. The app tells you that 1 cup of broccoli is 6 grams of carbs. Looking at the label on the pudding, Half a cup is equivalent to 25 grams of carbs. When you add that up, it comes to 61 grams of carbs. What is a good range for a meal? The recommendation is 45 to 60 grams of carb at a mealtime. What are some tips and tips and tricks for a successful easy carb counting? We do tend to go back and eat some of the same foods again and again. We get into routines. There's certain combinations of foods we like together. Once you've measured and calculated the carb content of those meals, you wouldn't need to do it again each time if you have a way to keep track of that, as long as you're eating the same amount. So there's going to be the difference. You might want to eat the same foods, but our appetites do vary. But again, if you can try to keep a consistent amount of carbs, it will make it easier when you're keeping track. And then go back every month or so, remeasure to ensure that you're still pretty accurate with your estimated portion sizes. We start out measuring everything. And after a little while, it's like we start to get familiar with what something looks like as far as a portion size. Over time, that vision can be a little distorted, and our portion sizes may gradually get bigger without us even meaning to. So, every once in a while, going back and making sure that you're pretty accurate with your measurements will be important. Many foods have a food label that make it easy to look up those grams of carbs. So we don't always have maybe a reference book or a phone with an app to look things up. So using those food labels is going to be very helpful. For fresh foods, it's imperative to weigh, as nobody knows what a 3-ounce apple looks like unless you have weighed it several times and can judge with trained eyes. You can get an idea, okay, it's larger or smaller than 3 ounces, but really to be accurate, it's going to be weighing it. So just to summarize what we've gone over, I mean, there's a lot of information when it comes to nutrition. In today's presentation, you should have gained increased knowledge and understanding of the following advanced diabetes nutrition concepts: which foods contain carbohydrate and which foods don't, what is the glycemic index, and how does it relate to my blood sugars, what are the important items to read on a food label, how does fiber affect my health in diabetes, what are the sugar substitutes that are safe for us to use? And how do I count carbohydrates to better control my blood sugars? Does anybody have any questions that you'd like me to help answer for you today? Anyway, it was a lot of information. I don't see any questions right this moment, but I do have some questions that I've been asked throughout my time working with people who have diabetes. And just one example would be, having somebody ask about, the foods that I really enjoy might not really be the healthiest options, but how do I make them healthier? Um, there are swap lists out there that say, okay, I really would like a steak, but how can I satisfy that craving with something that might be a little healthier? One great resource would be the Eat This, Not That books. I'm sure you can find them on Amazon. I don't have any connection to those books, so it doesn't benefit me to promote that book, but it's a very helpful resource because it really does say, if I want this, what's a good healthy option for me? The American Diabetes Association is another great resource, and their website does have nutrition information and a section that can help with meal planning. I would also encourage people to keep a food diary to share with your diabetes educator and your provider. Your diabetes educator would be happy to look through your food diary and review with you where are some places that maybe you could make some small changes that would have a big impact on your blood glucose levels. And just looking to see. I think we have a question here. Oh, how do you find your glycemic index? You know, that is a great question because it isn't always like readily available. Um, either, let's see here. So for glycemic index, I certainly wouldn't hesitate to look it up online. Um, there are a variety of resources online that have even the glycemic index charts. Uh, health.harvard.edu is one good resource. You know, you do want to be careful what resources you choose, but there is also glycemicindex.com, which would be another great resource. Um, but it would be nice if they added that to all the food labels because then we could break it down and decide better, you know, how to create a meal that's going to be the best impact on our blood sugars. So you know, that might be something that we should look into. How can we add that to our food labels? Now, I thought I saw another question here, and I'm trying to get to it. Is aspartame bad for you? You know, I think there was a time where a lot of people were talking about sweet and low and it being connected to cancer. And, you know, I think it scared a lot of people off because nobody wants cancer. And so people stopped eating it or adding it to their foods because of that risk. Um, is it is there still that risk? I would say really your most likely risk to have is going to be some more immediate things like a headache. Some people get dizziness. There are some reports still out there that it can contribute to cancer. So I think people do tend to still stay away from aspartame when we have other healthier, more natural options. Another question I see here is, does exercise affect insulin carbohydrate intake or uptake? I'm sorry. I didn't see that correctly. So, yes, exercise is going to have an impact on how quickly your body is going to process food, and it also can have an impact on how rapidly insulin is absorbed. So some things that we don't really think about is when we're going to exercise, where you put that insulin injection, even though it's subcutaneous injection, if it's into a body part that you're going to be really actively using, that insulin may be absorbed quicker. So if you're going to go running and you put the injection into your thigh, yes, you may absorb that insulin quicker and your blood sugar may drop quicker. Or if you put it in your arm and you're doing some weightlifting or playing basketball, something that uses the arms a lot. So people that are really active, when they know they're going to be active and they're doing an injection, tend to maybe use their belly or their midsection a little bit more because it's going to be less of an impact on how rapidly the insulin is absorbed because it's not being used as much as maybe your arms or legs. I hope that makes sense. But definitely, it also has an impact on how quickly you burn that carbohydrate. And so that's where we have to worry about the risk of low blood sugars because the insulin may be absorbed quicker and the carbohydrate may be burned quicker. So there is an increased risk of lows with that activity. And I don't see any other questions right now. Um, I could give another example or two. Sorry. Uh, One thing that I often find people struggle with is that portion size. We look at that food label and the recommended serving size might seem really small compared to what we're used to eating. So, how do I go from eating maybe a plate full that I've never measured before to having this little tiny serving that just looking at it, I still feel hungry? Um, how do you get past that? So, I have always encouraged people to, instead of going from filling your plate right to those set portion sizes, go ahead and put your food on your plate like you normally would. But this time, you might take a spoon of potatoes away, or maybe half a piece of bread away. So you decrease your portion size gradually. After you kind of get used to that amount and don't feel like you're depriving yourself, then you gradually decrease the food on your plate some more. Eventually, you get to where those recommended serving sizes are without feeling deprived. Um, I find that really works for a lot of people. Um, and remember, fiber is more filling. So, putting more of those vegetables on your plate are going to also help you feel full longer. Let me just check to see if there's any other questions that have come up, which I don't see any. Um, I, I can give maybe another example of um, some questions that I've gotten. Some people like to ask, why does my blood sugar rise at different times after I eat? And we did talk a little bit about that, how different foods do break down to glucose at different rates. The carbohydrates are going to turn to glucose first, as well as some of those starchier vegetables. The higher fat and protein do take longer to impact the blood glucose. Um, then we have other health issues that can also affect how that food is processed and converted into glucose. So things like gastroparesis, we can see that this will slow the process and make it unpredictable when that blood glucose will rise. Sometimes it's almost like all of a sudden it kicks in and this blood sugar goes way up. So figuring out insulin dosing when it's more unpredictable, the impact it's going to have on your blood sugar, it's just going to be really challenging. I always encourage people to work closely with their diabetes educator and their healthcare provider to fine tune those doses. And just because you've been on a dose that worked for a while and now blood sugars maybe aren't as stable, it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong if you need an insulin adjustment. It just means your body has different needs. So, whenever you see a pattern where you've got a few days of blood sugars running a little higher, work with your diabetes educator and your healthcare provider to figure out how best to get those blood sugars back under control again. I mean, there are so many different factors. Food is just one factor that affects our blood glucose levels. Well, I really appreciate everybody taking time to be here and to listen to this talk. I hope that you take some of this information and incorporate it into your self management of your diabetes and find some improved quality of life. Enjoy that food, even while you're trying to make some of those changes. Thank you. There are upcoming live events. If you're interested in any of the upcoming live events, just let your diabetes coach know and they can send you a schedule. It looks like in August, they're going to be doing the blood sugar boot camp, which is a great one. This is the ins and outs of blood sugar testing. And then in September, they're going to be doing a happy heart is a healthy heart. Another great topic. Some additional Cecilia Health resources. There is a Facebook group, and you can also visit the Cecilia Health blog. And there is the information there on the screen for you. I'm just going to leave it here for a moment so you can see it. And I do see another question had come up. How long does it take for glucose level to drop? I'm going to answer that one quick before we end. Um, how long it takes for a blood glucose level to drop is also dependent on a lot of variables. If you're not active, it's going to take longer for that insulin level to drop, depending on what you take to treat the diabetes. Is going to influence when that blood sugar might drop or when it might rise. So whether it's an oral medication or insulin. And then it's also, activity. If you're going to be active, sometimes we see that blood sugar level drop during the activity. It could drop right after the activity. And I've even seen times where a blood sugar can drop hours after an activity. It's just an example of this. I do have a son with type 1 diabetes, and he could do football. He could play football and keep his blood sugar stable, not have any problems. But if he went swimming, it didn't matter what time of day, whether it was morning, afternoon, evening, no matter what time he went swimming, it was guaranteed he would have a low blood sugar in the middle of the night. So if you're doing different exercises, check in to see how your blood sugar responds to it. Another great place to keep a little journal to see how does your body respond to activity would be helpful. It gives you an idea how best to prepare and plan for that activity. If you know your blood sugar is going to drop while you're doing a certain activity, you're going to want to make sure your blood sugar is in a safe place beforehand. Maybe have a little protein before you exercise to make sure your blood sugar doesn't drop. And those are just, a few options, a few things to consider. But again, there's other factors that will impact the rise and fall of a blood sugar. And unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go into all of the factors, but those are a few. And thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your attendance and your participation. You all have a great evening.